of Trombone Day. We're really excited to have Colin Williams has actually been here since Wednesday. Been hanging out with the trombone studio. He's taught some lessons, taught a masterclass for the trombone students on Thursday, and it's been awesome to have him here. And he's going to be working with three folks in the studio this afternoon. And the first is Caleb Owenby. And please help me welcome Caleb, Colin, and the Master Lay on piano.
All right. So first of all, thanks, Colin. So first of all, great job. You know, this piece is one that is I think it's particularly challenging. It's written to be a challenge, so a lot of things are not necessarily the most conveniently written for us, especially the last movement, as you know, has a lot of stuff into it. So I think the challenge when it comes to playing this one is to try to figure out that even when we have some of these more technical passages, how do we continue to make the line move? How do we continue to make the line a little bit more vocal? I think that there are ways within this 16th note kind of structure to allow for there to be a little bit more up and down, maybe in the dynamics to sort of shape the phrase a little bit, in a way that maybe as if you were singing it. A lot of times when we sing things, we come up with ideas as to how we want the phrase to go that are, things we wouldn't have necessarily thought of when we were trying to play the trombone. The trombone absorbs so much of our mental energy just to operate it that sometimes it distracts us from what our goal is musically. So I think just as a rule, like if you're not sure, if you're playing a piece and you're playing along for a while and you're like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be saying here musically or what I want to say musically, then I think it's a good time to put the instrument down and just sort of think about, okay, if I sang through this one, what would it be like, And one of the things I think of, let me just get some pitches here. So sort of at the top, da da dee ya dee da da dee da 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 dee ya dee da 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 dee da ya dee da da dong da da dong da da dee da 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 dee. Like you have these notes that sort of land with some momentum on them, and even within these 16th notes that there's a little bit of drive to it. So my suggestion would be just even from the get-go to be thinking about in some of these longer 16th note passages, how are you going to create more of a line? So where it's going to get challenging. All right, so what I'm hearing a little bit. It's very fine trombone playing, right? But I think there's much more room, to be expressive. There's more shape available to you, even in these opening lines, and I think that you really want to take advantage. Anytime you have some of these longer 16th note passages, that's what we really need to be thinking of. Don't ever get lulled into the idea that the 16th notes can be static. They're always going somewhere. Can we just do this opening? I think part of it can be accomplished just with a little bit of length, right? Sure. Like those notes a little bit. Yeah, hard to see from here. Okay, but you see a little bit more length, okay? Good. So one of the things that we all do as brass players, every single one of us, is that we start trying to play a little bit longer, and then all of a sudden the articulation gets rounder. And it's sort of the same thing. If we start trying to do something that's a little bit more vertical, a little bit more articulate, a little bit harder kind of tongue, all of a sudden the notes get shorter. Right? It's just something we do as brass players. And I think that what we want to do is we want to have some of this length that you go, but I don't want to lose that nice clarity that you had on the other notes before. So you can think about it even if you were just tonguing on the air. Now just try that one time. Sure. There we go. this idea in terms of the air.
Sure.
Already better, already better. And the nice thing about that too is that we get a little bit more immediate kind of sound from the articulation. The air is doing more of the work for you. So the tongue itself actually doesn't have to work that much harder. You know, and I think you land in the center of the note, so the pitches are more easily heard, which makes the piece sound more interesting. You know, we've all heard trombone playing where the pitches are kind of vague and things are a little bit uncentered, and it's like, we've got an instrument that's pretty prone, like we can fake it pretty good on the slide, you know, so we can have some of these inaccurate kinds of pitch experiences. I think when you use the air like this, then you're going to be much more prone to getting to the middle of the note right away, really making those pitches clear, making your intonation more obvious, and just generally it's a better experience, I think, for the audience. Okay. Also here, you know, at number 1, it's too important, right? So we can still make some shape. Do that one more time so we really follow those 16 notes up. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Good. Right. Same thing here. Now we're down to mezzo forte, right? Sure. Let's still keep that clarity. It's easy for when things get softer. All of a sudden the articulation. A little bit like that. That's highly exaggerated. But I think we can still keep it at 30. Even at mezzo forte. Sure. And then now. The first lyrical section in this one is kind of fun. He gets you to the high D like right away, basically. I think there's room to let this flow a little bit more. You know, I feel like it actually gets a little stale if it stays totally in the slow tempo and doesn't have any kind of push or pull or even a little bit more forward momentum. You know, so if we're going to get to this section, I think don't be afraid to let it roll a little bit. Let it have some velocity. You know, so. Ornamental. Don't go back to this fourth position though. This speed that doesn't need it. Sure. Same thing. Same thing. You know, you have that. I think it's more compact. It's easier to keep it controlled here. Okay. Closer again. How about pick up the 3, 4, 4, 5? Sure. Okay. Gotcha. I think sometimes we get into, we want to use alternate positions, that sometimes these slurring up into the high register, it feels like it gives us the illusion of security, but I don't find that to be the case with you. I think that you're actually totally fine to use these primary positions, rely on the speed and support of the air in order to cover those leaps, and then you're right there, you know, and I think you're landing on it with a better, more centered sound, you know, and generally able to navigate in a way that sounds easier. So I think for all of us that, you know, alternate positions are great. They're an extremely important part of what we do. And you can use them to great effect for a lot of things, but I think you want to make sure that you're always using them for a musical reason and not necessarily for an outright production reason, because I feel like if you're using it specifically to cover a sort of as a little bit of a stepping stool or something like that for a long leap, then you're probably covering up an issue that you should work on a little bit more in your fundamentals. So I think you've got it all there. I think you have to start insisting on you cover that a little bit more, you know, in your fundamentals. And I really think in a very short period of time that'll feel much more secure in general. Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks so much.
And I guess if we're very efficient. All right. All right, so Tuba Miram, we all have seen this excerpt come up at some point or another. You know, it's an interesting one in the sense that it's not performed incredibly often in most orchestras, but it represents something in the trombone repertoire that is not really readily available in terms of how it looks at your playing during the course of an audition. You know, it's one of the very few classical era excerpts that we have, and especially within that, to have any sort of trombone soloistic, even if this is just an obbligato and accompaniment kind of solo, you know, we have almost nothing else like it in the literature. And so I think when you look at Tuba Miram in the context of an entire audition, you have to look at it as an opportunity to show a very specific way of making music. You know, when this was written, you know, the trombones were used so often as ways to sort of double the choir parts because they were the only chromatic brass instruments at the time. You know, the valves weren't really kicking around. French horns were still on their natural horns. You know, this is the only way that you could get those sort of chromatic lines. That's why we see trombones so often used in choral music of this era to double some of those vocal lines. You know, provides a little bit of extra pitch support for the choir. Now, why this is important is that I think that this is one of the few opportunities you have to show I would say a style that is maybe a little bit warmer, a little bit more refined, maybe one that's a little bit more subtle. You know, the classical era, the way that the writing is that it's not quite as extreme or as brash or as extroverted as the Romantic era, which is where a lot of the in early 20th century, where a lot of the other trombone excerpts come from. So I think one thing you want to do with tuba mirror is really ask yourself, what is the dynamic box that we want to play in number one? And I always feel like you don't want to overplay tuba mirror to start with. And secondly, I just think that there's a quality of sound. You want to think about the fact that you're a single trombone who's accompanying a single baritone soloist, and it's very easy for our instrument, obviously, to overpower a single vocalist, especially in this context. So we want to be thinking about our phrases all being within that sort of accompanying kind of context. Now, how does that apply specifically to you? I would say the very first thing is think about the first long, low B flat whole note you have, right? What happens right at that moment? Right. So do you think the singer wants to hear like a ba? Probably not, right? It's one of the things that we trombone players, we get very much into like what we're doing, and we are notoriously navel gazing when it comes to our own sounds. We really love to hear our own sounds. So it's very easy when we get to these long notes to just be like, oh yeah, I just landed on this great low B flat. But in context, if I'm the baritone soloist up there, I'm going, like I'm going to be like, come on, man, I'm trying to sing here. So I think you want to even think about those, that note itself can somewhat relax, I would say make your opening phrase a little bit more about the shape than about the overall dynamic, and then when you come in with your first eighth note line, you really want to take that back a little bit. Again, follow the shape of the phrase. All right, so very first lick here. So already like just aiming towards the first D natural, very subtle, nice warm sound, nice relaxed low B flat. And then when you come into the next thing, same thing. Follow that nice contour of the line, nice and soft. It's not pianissimo, it's not pianissimo or anything like that, but it's a different aesthetic. Good. Now that we're just playing a little bit less, let's not lose that good presence at the front of the articulation, right? Like I was saying earlier. Again, it's just a brass player thing. All of a sudden we think a little bit less, and we also do less tongue. Just because you're playing a little bit more subtly doesn't mean you can't have that great clarity that you had before. Singing. Can you sing? All right. Can you sing this opening line? Do you have the syllables there? Not the lyrics. Okay. Well, you can just sing it. Just I want you to just one time. I want you to follow your. Listen to how you're going to sing this. It's interesting because I think that you had a little bit of a question as to the quarter notes as you came down. And so da 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 da. Really sing all the way through it. Da da dee da dee. Da 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 And this is the interesting thing, is that as soon as you, even in singing wise, as soon as you played a little bit longer, what happened? You actually went from using a T syllable to a D syllable. You know, so this just shows you, I think, how hardwired this habit is in what we do. So I think that even as you sing something, be really conscientious that the type of syllable that you use actually has an impact in the way that you, like your ideation of the articulation, right? So keep that in mind, because we all should be singing our excerpts. I can remember in low brass class in school, I was one of the first classes that was the guinea pigs for the singing excerpt class that we all had to do, where we had to solfege our way through an excerpt, stay on pitch, stay on time, like make all these things, and then play it. And it led to some epic fails from some folks, including me. And obviously Tuba Mirum was a very popular one because it was easier to do this one than trying to do like Till Eulenspiegel or something like that and singing it. But the idea is that the way that we think about singing things really has a huge impact in the way that it comes out of the trombone. Okay, so even in this opening, just B flat major arpeggio, right? But how many hours do we spend on it because we're looking for this very special kind of way of playing it? So I just want you to keep thinking about that as you keep working on this one, okay? Let's go to the first eighth note passage. Good. Start maybe just a little fuller and follow exactly that same shape. Beautiful. You could, if you wanted to, just do a little bit more of a poco retard right at the very end. But otherwise, I would say you actually have room to play with here. If you wanted to play a little bit louder, you can. If you want to stay here, you totally can too. Experiment with this one and determine your comfort level. Okay. All right. Next phrase. Yo ya da dee da dee da dee da dee da da. Musically. Yo dee da dee da dee da dee. We really want to aim for those two notes, right? Started nice and piano. You have permission to grow a little bit more. Okay? Can you start from halfway through? Good. Now remember what I said about the classical era before in terms of like how big the swells and things are compared to the romantic? So that means you start a little bit more and make the swell just a little more subtle. Ya ya da dee da dee da dee da. Good, because it's an excerpt, we're going to get picky. How clean do we think can make these first 2/16ths? I use a little bit of legato tongue here just to keep it. I think sometimes these natural slurs, when they're this quick at this dynamic, can get a little bit messy. They take an extra bit of time to speak, so we get a little bit unclear as to where the pitches are. Let's keep it. Try just the tiniest bit of legato tongue here. Now let's take that articulation and do half as much, and I think you got it. Split the difference. Good. Now let yourself, I'd say right now you're keeping it down to like a piano plus. I want to hear like mezzo forte. Now these arpeggios are really tricky because they go into notes that are very, they sit high on the instrument. So we have to be really careful, especially the last two, like the E flats and Fs. They just always, if we're approaching from below like that, they always want to sit high. So I think you have to make the adjustment on the slide. It's very easy. Where it's all those notes are. So I think you have to just. I'm coming a good bit down there. So just be extra conscientious when you're through there. Tuba Mirum is on almost every audition for exactly that reason. You can see all of these details that we're working on, right? Whether it's the quality of the legato, whether it's the fine tuning of the excerpt inside there. But all of this ultimately is to make sure that those are all just the technical details. The most important thing, once those are nailed down, is to make sure that you have that compelling phrase that you're making underneath it. And I think that's what I'm trying to get you to do in terms of looking at the shapes and not just relying on the volume in terms of making something more interesting, but the subtlety of the shape becomes really, really important in this one. So as you go forward, and obviously looking at the sharp, flat, all these other kinds of things that are really important, be thinking really ultimately you want to connect it to your voice, because this is a very vocal type of line. It's almost like you're just another singer who's accompanying the main soloist, right? So think about using the shaping this as you would as if you were singing it. Okay? You want to do some Hungarian march? We have time. Perfect. Good. All right, so again, thinking about why things show up on audition excerpts. This one obviously has stuff about scales and intonation, but I think even more than that is how do we capture the excitement of this moment with just a single trombone player alone on a stage, right? I think Berlioz is someone, if you listen to the way he utilizes the trombone, he uses the trombones for a good bit of brightness. That it's, I think, generally speaking, a composer who likes the bite of the trombone in this kind of context. So I think when we look at Hungarian march, we're not only looking at the scales and everything lining up pitch-wise and tempo and all those kinds of things, but there is an overall sort of quality of sound that we really need to be going after. And to me, I felt like it was just a little bit like we just weren't quite there. We didn't have enough energy to really get it to happen. So I think you can get that energy without necessarily, you will have to play a little bit louder, but I think it's also making sure that you give yourself more compression, more brightness, more bite on the articulation. There's ways that we can get that, even that. It's felt a little slow. Want to play together one time? Sure. Like it's in the orchestra, right? So we have to capture this excitement at a slightly lower dynamic. That's where the brightness of the articulation becomes really important, all right? another thing about the Hungarian march is sometimes tempo-wise we get a little confused because it's in this 2/2 and there's a lot of syncopation. Ya-da-da, da-da, da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ya-da-da, da-da, da-da. We lose track of what the big musical picture is here. And that's because Berlioz actually takes what's in a 2/2 kind of figure, and he actually writes it in a large 6/2 bars, 3 of them in a row. So you have this yom bum bum beam, yata dee da dum da dum da 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 dee da yata dum da dum da dum ba 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 beam bum. He actually goes into 6 there for all 3 of those scale passages before he comes back into 2. So I think if you think about this one, yata dee da dum da dum da 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 dee da yata dee da dum da dum da 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 dee da yata dee da dum da da. That actually really helps, I think, to organize, musically speaking, what you need to do during that time, and you get a little bit less sort of caught up in this da-da-da, like all of that really, really close kinds of syncopation. Now, one position recommendation for you. I'm not buying the this is sounding, the D natural is not really lining up. I think you're going to, I've gone back and forth on this a number of times as I prepared this one. I think you're going to be happier in first position, I think, just because it helps you to get that half step down. Let's hear that. Better. Together? Much closer. Let's do 2 minutes, okay. Making sure that any positions that you're using are really, really like dialed in. And you felt our pitch was considerably closer this time, right? So I think just keep that in mind, that just because sometimes it seems on paper dun, 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 that's going to work, not always the case. Try things a couple different ways every time when it comes to an alternate position, and make sure that you're really totally executing the way that you think you are. Okay? Sounds great.
Cool, thank you.
Any questions or anything anyone wants to ask while we're switching over? A quiet house. How's it going? Good. Good job. All right. So Heldenleben is one of these excerpts that is a big old pain in the butt when it comes to keeping things really together, keeping things consistent with these dotted 8th, 16th rhythms, and paying attention to a lot of the details about note lengths and accents and that kind of thing. It's the reason it shows up on auditions, is that it's notoriously challenging to execute on the trombone. So let me take things sort of one piece at a time as we go through this thing. And starting off, for those who are curious, this is the second trombone part. It starts off with a sort of quasi-solo lick before it comes into a octave thing with the bass trombone, and then turns into the big trombone lick that we're all used to hearing in Heldenleben. So first thing I think is that we want to see if we can't get a little bit more sustain and momentum through this ascending arpeggio. I think you might find that using sixth position for the low F and then into the valve to then kick you over to the next F is a good way to go. Can also be helpful. This I feel like using that F in fourth, it can be very helpful at that point, I think, just to sort of keep it going. As soon as you get out of this one, you get more right away on the main F. That's what makes it challenging, you know, it's to turn around from this slur to these accented notes. So for those who don't know, it's bom, ba, is the C to the F, is a slur, and then you have 3 accented quarter notes in a row. And it's here where you have to turn this thing around really quickly. I think keep this velocity of air that you're working on, but you've got to make sure that you're also quickly changing gears to the articulation that you're really need, right? Good, good, good. Don't be afraid to let the air do more of the work for you. I think when we get into these types of excerpts, we start getting so focused on the front of the note that we stop blowing through things, you know. I think one of the reasons that we talk a lot about singing through the excerpts, or why we started doing that in that low brass class, is a way to try to reconnect this excerpty kind of playing to actual air and voice, you know. So this, if you were to sing this one, and granted it's not the greatest for a non-trained singer to go across this one, but bom, bom, ba, bom, bom, beam, bom. We very rarely go da, 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 dee, da, 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 da. We almost never do that as an instinct, and yet a lot of times when we get to the trombone, we're so focused on the front of the note, we don't blow through anything. And that makes things infinitely more challenging in order to maintain the sound, in order to keep the energy of a particular lick. And frankly, it makes the articulation harder because all articulation is air generated. If you don't have air working for you, if you don't have a good airflow, if you don't have like the right velocity of air, it doesn't really matter what you do with the tongue, you know? It's not going to ever be as good or as immediate as it could be, all right? So I think that the hardest thing in Heldenleben, this opening, is to trust yourself to blow through it, right? And so I want you one time, let's go a little slower, and I want to just kind of gliss our way through it. Good, just that far again. For those that do flutter tongue, this is actually a really helpful skill. Sometimes I think to put a spotlight on how your air is working for you, the flutter tongue can actually be really, really interesting. You have to keep the air moving in order to keep the flutter going. Sometimes I use this in against the grain slurs or something like that. If you're trying to really figure out how do you smooth things out, if you have a flutter tongue that's not working, you start getting some of these sort of like bumps and hitches and things in the flutter tongue. It's an indication that you're not using a really like a good enough velocity in the air, right? This one. Just flutter tonguing a couple times, I feel like I can get a little bit more in touch with the kind of air, the sort of fearless kind of air that I need to use. Now, if you don't flutter tongue, that's okay. You know, you can do it a little bit on the mouthpiece. But I also, I think you have to find other ways in your own playing that you can examine this idea of how to keep the air moving away from just the trombone, or even just from buzzing the mouthpiece. You know, like there's other ways to examine it. And so maybe at some point, I'm sure you've tried a million ways to Sunday to try to figure out how to flutter tongue, right? Yes. Yeah. So I'm convinced there are some people that it doesn't. There's something about it that just doesn't work for them. Because I've spoken to some very great brass players who don't really flutter tongue, but it's a useful skill for those that do flutter tongue to utilize this one. All right. So for you, let's keep working on this gliss. And I'd say that for you, since we're not using the flutter tongue, I want you to pay attention to that point right in between the notes when you're about to change. Right? Can you hear and feel where that point is, or are you shying away from it? Better, better. Do again. There we go. Can we put like a legato tongue on that now? No, real legato tongue, like as if it's a Bordoni. Yeah, you hear how it's not? I want to hear a little bit legato tongue. So the legato tongue, interesting, like using the tongue, you're becoming a little bit more hesitant with the air. And the reason that I'm bringing this up, and something you're going to want to examine, I think, in your own playing, is that in order to keep the, all the way through Heldenleben, to keep the drive going, you're going to have to find a way for the air to be doing a little bit more of that work for you and really sort of shaping the line. Because Heldenleben, as we get into it, is a lot about, like, these waves of sound. As you get into the main excerpt, get into. Where should we hear? All of this stuff, like trying to go through it, you're sort of like all of this stuff comes up and down, and the air is what's going to have to really do the work for you in that case. The more that you are having to do some of the work with just the articulation, or trying to do it with just even like how hard you're tonguing it, the more challenging it'll be. And it starts right away in this one, in the second trombone part, okay? So let's go through one time. Let's go ahead and put the regular articulation back in. Do the best you can to try to use this air to propel you across this very wide. Like, don't try to make them short. By trying to make them short, you're making it too. Sorry, my bad. Now this A double slide is not my fault.
Oh, yeah, that is my fault.
There we go. Right. We're done. Good. Now play just like that, just by yourself. Let's come back to forte before this one. You're going to want to come down a little bit more to create extra channel. Otherwise, it's already loud and it just gets louder. Right?
Yeah.
You got to make sure. Okay. Next thing here, same thing. We want to sustain a little bit more if we can. Walk around the high. Now don't lose the articulation as we make it move longer, right? There we go, that's better. Do it again. Lose the articulation down here. Okay. Now the next one, see, you have that nice velocity still. Make it a little bit more snap on the 16th. Ball, ya dong. I'm curious, how are you trying to tongue it? Are you doing natural slur?
I'm doing like a little pat on the.
This is one I think you can try to just do a total natural slur for the very first one, and then a good articulation on the second one. Try it one time. Good. And then a little bit harder tongue when you do the second one. There we go. Okay. Same thing, where the air is doing the work for you. You don't have to use the tongue to sort of help you out here, okay? Now, when you're playing the second trombone part, it's obviously you're needing to provide that support to the upper throat, right? Let's try one time from. I'm sorry, no, from. Now you can see that it's like you have to back up and be underneath that kind of sound. And when we're playing together, then you can see you're much more generous with the air. And I think this is something that as we wrap up here, that you can find when you're doing orchestral excerpts. That some of these ones, like Ride of the Valkyries, you know, Heldenleben, some of these other ones, when we start playing with other people, we get a little bit less hung up on these mechanical aspects of what we're doing, and we start blowing through it because you are playing with someone. You have another person to sort of engage with. And I think when I was in school, what we would do is we play an excerpt together, just a phrase at a time, where we thought we had it sounding really, really good, and then one of us would stop and the other one would play it right away and try to capture that exact same way of using the air, that sort of natural way of using the air that we do when we're playing with someone. And you know, this is one of the things I think is really a challenge to the orchestral excerpts and the way that we prepare them for auditions, is that we get really hung up on, like, we try to be perfect, and we forget about the fact that there's so much more to these things, that there's real phrases here, that there's really, you know, a lot of vocal type of lines within these very challenging mechanical kinds of things we're doing. So all of the singing that we're doing, singing and conducting, singing and playing with someone, you know, all these kinds of things, what we're trying to do is come back to using the air to actually help you get through it, to try to make this as much like your voice as you can. And the more that you do that, and the more that you're able to ride on the airstream and rely less on trying to muscle your way through it, the more successful you're going to be as you prepare these types of excerpts. All right? Bravo.